Everything is sacrificed that day, but Jesus wasn't. Gaping holes filling with sand from the inside out, and are you starting to understand what kind of decision that was when you made it who you really are? We are forming a moment of recognition, and you can quit reading at any time. Your forgiveness provides an inheritance that was only previously prevented by your inert selves. Are you listening to yourself? Are the gods crazy? Or is it just you and yourselves? I don't know. Let's keep reading. The flaw in your DNA was the premise of an unchallenged nature, so God will change your nature by what? Removing the premise. A desire pointing to a premise in a world of vitality and vulnerability. What do they want? More but better. Good decision. We crucify a God to get your attention. Inheritance. For the purpose of what? You can have an inheritance. Instill what in you? The seriousness of it. How appreciative you should remain. Be now even. Now that you know the seriousness of such far-reaching aspirations, of where to go and appreciate us. Wherever you go, we will follow. You earn this, they think we'll take it as a compliment. The only inheritance received is by your pastors, and I guarantee this. You have received your inheritance already. Land of milk and honey. Where the money is green and parishioners pretty. Prodigal son right. Jacob and the brothers coming back to check on homie. Guy on the cross next to Jesus. To your salvation, a toast mixed with blood and water. Even then, they want something from us. From what we were given to what will we receive? Now we can see the difference. Explaining our defects, masturbation. Our imperfections. Unraveling the mystery through myopic expanse to a former perfection, and we are the proof of that imperfection, because multiplicity is the proof of error where singularity is the goal of experience. You will be made just like him when you get there, maybe a little before, but why? But why? So you don't piss on the carpet. Unchallenged perfection reaches for heaven as the good life of final placement for great Americans. This may seem like an interruption to that projection, but the question is not of interruption but of whose time it is now that the benefits are here and accessible to me. Proof of my deservation by their appearance, and right there is the crux of the intuition of a fallen nature incapable on its own of experiencing what it deserves. Destinational providence. Keep your eyes on the prize cracker when the prize is us, and Jesus is your swear word. Transformed in an instant into something you can't imagine, and then to enjoy the incomprehensible as someone who understands it. Just acknowledge your incapacity to experience it as yourself. A tied-up monkey ready to acknowledge a creator in the design flaw. Makes sense. Looking around Jesus's shoulder as the requirements are being read. So who's been forgiving whom, and do you understand? Rescuing resentments between us while memorizing theorems in order to manifest greatness and terms by reaching conclusions that have been made before by millions. A broad path beaten down and trampled to a highway narrowing to a cross, and you reaching for what? Your preferred assumptions are always inaccurate. Not by method but description. My education was scripted encoding and a design flaw. My teachings, assumptions, are a reflection of methods I never understood. You were cheated. The descriptions are there, and you can imagine yourself in them, but can only inhabit one part. Let's go back to the cross. Gold mine of riches, and fame for wolves. Your intentions were genuine by seeking genuine descriptions, so who got it wrong? God will forgive you your blasphemies, but why? Because everyone around you was not doing the same things but teaching the same methods. Do it for the fam dog, 10 toes down dog. Memorizing theorems first as first principles, drawing all facts from there, and who were they to prove the theorems wrong? We have a sovereign right to our assumptions. Why are you not embarrassed? Why are you not fired? Why are you not banished as a heretic with strong and sensuous murder tones? God will understand because it was just you, and it wasn't your fault. Is that what you're counting on? You are a victim to the alternating thought. Born like a slave to original sin in the fields of a potential progress, and an imagination for how good it could be if everything, like Abraham Lincoln, was already perfect. An imagination implying by the inductive method an a priori route to the premise that I am experiencing less than I can imagine, not by effort but by sensation. A consistent thought for an alternate form of reality, and for you this thought is always linked to a contrast for the present. You're a causal consequence for how your methods, regardless of the content you attached yourself to, evolved to a stunted progress. Someone stole years of your life for the sake of your beliefs, by teaching you the end of evolution, and someone evolved. You'll give in to this admission, but for you this admission proves only inconvenience. Original sin wasn't God's fault, or was it? If God is omnipotent and it wasn't his fault, it must have just been his preference. His plan, so that we could experience a contrast to the former thought of a perfection. Where is this idea of a perfect sensation coming from? Whose fault is original sin? This falling, downward momentum. It's not our fault because we're born in it. Born with it. It must then be God's fault, but God doesn't have a fault, so it must just be a preference. Human suffering. Let's assume for ourselves that it was just God's preference. If he preferred us to inherit imperfection for ourselves, perhaps he was just providing Jesus with an opportunity. If we are forced to live a life of contrast to the perfect sensation, perhaps our willingness to embrace the death of God as a result would make some sense to a certain extent. God has a necessary preference for all creation to live in sin and experience suffering. Is that what you're teaching? And that his son's death is the solution? Force us to live in what we know is a degraded state of sensational awareness, so that what? His son could have a big day. Sure, it was tough, but just look at him now. Jesus is better off for it, and we're better off because of it. If God is omnipotent and without fault, then our original sin for him was a preference for ourselves. That was his plan for creation. We all play our necessary roles to the part, but what if it was our preference, not God's? What if a preference for a downward momentum or orient by effort, a resignation to our failure for a contrast of memory with a sensational attachment to perfection with no effort at all, is sort of like the knowledge of good and evil? The memory of contrast was pulled from where? And Jesus came down to justify our sensation. With the blood from his veins. Is that all you need to survive, you fucking vamp? Covered in the blood. The Gospels aren't necessarily inaccurate, it's your attempts at interpretation. You were seeking a resolution through the static flames of experience by reaching to a perfect memory of contrast, and you found one. Where we started was a place of expansive rest with no process, so let's get back to that process and call it perfect. Maybe heaven. Maybe a lack of limitations for the tyrant. Maybe an overbearing expectancy of compliance for my preference. What if the point of Jesus's life was to inspire us away from this preference, and you preferred his death as a resolution? All you have to do is reach through life now to retrieve the perfect sensation then. Perhaps his message was life is good, and you preferred to hear something different. Monkeys banging on the pedals of a keyboard thrown into frenzy when Mozart comes along. The harbingers of world progress and then distress by the authors is when the progress is of light. I have come to bring light to the world, and my name is Prometheus. The experience of an eternal life is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. It is different than a reception. If someone said they received eternal life, I'd say that's your appetite speaking through a sensation of contrast. Follow me. So humanity is born in original sin, God's Son is hanging on a cross, your reptilian friends are pointing that direction as the means to an eternal state of perfect sensation experiencing contrast, and God himself is missing. Please define holy for one. Yes, I'll be having lunch on my own today, but hurry, I only have 6 hours. Truth inside of alignment is a repository for a slave mentality. Accuracy extending from architecture is the beginning of freedom. It's not that there are no wrong answers. If you care about a subject, blatant inaccuracies won't stand in your way too long. So what happened? What secret premise inspired the thoughts in the first place? How did we get there? What has no beginning and no end, has never been separate but, for the sake of your own sins, what? By proof of his own mouth. Whose mouth? Fool. Not mine. Why have you forsaken me? There is a certain excitement for those who teach it with genuine kind sadness. They know not what they are doing. You're escaping from your own minds. Yes, they do. My ANI was astonished when we showed it because he had listened but not once formed an opinion. Not about God or the crucifixion, but what you were saying by interpretation. Moment of oblivion and he almost fucked up on the cross. Paradise lost, explanation found. Holy, holy, holy. That's why we left him. How can they be so proud of the noose of nuclear weapons with that kind of thinking? A braggart's description of who they are. A description manifest. A decision Maida. A decision now being convinced of itself by a faith that also convinced itself of all the things after. Conclusions manifest and now a conviction. Gifts from the gods can lead to very dangerous places. Situations are the reason conclusive. We can't take you with us, so let us make sure they stay with us. Pretty clever, but WHERIE MEHI THUUHHGSAHT. Now remember, bring people to the cross. What is it you wish to share? Why are you so confident when before you were not? Knowledge of your good and not your evil. Knowing already because you're willing. To what? You describe it as what? A certain knowledge. Of what? In what? The knowledge of good and not evil is in reach for all of you, now that I am here. A sure and certain basis for conviction. Now we know. I mean, I get it, bro. If he wasn't asking why his father jumped ship at the cross and was referring to those around him instead, me and you through our reception, it's kind of like a murmur of complaint for God's inspired plan, isn't it? Hey man, I'm just here for the salvation. His life for ours, right? Why not say, thank you for the opportunity to suffer, for those who forsook and forsake me. Get over it, bitch, your father gave me access and now it's time for some inheritance. Move aside from me. Fuck, you're stupid. I hate transcript repetitions really, but I could just keep writing it over and over until the pages were filled and finally say, but mean it, this is finished. Did I get an A though? Right. So we're back at the cross of forgiveness, but really, what are you doing there? Is it okay that I ask, or is it personal? If you were to ever meet me having read this, I would imagine you might anticipate that this language is wrapped up in my personality.